Heading back to Hope County, Montana to give you my review of Far Cry New Dawn, which is basically a sequel spin-off to Far Cry 5, available on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC for $40 US. If you would like another review of Far Cry New Dawn before you decide whether or not to purchase and play it, check out my friend Carrick's video, Carrick over at ACG. He is one of the best reviewers of games, AAA and indie. So, this is how my reviews work. We go over the pros, the cons, as well as my final verdict. The pros. If you enjoyed your time in Far Cry 5, you're going to have a good time in Far Cry New Dawn. The return to Hope County, Montana, and you're going to run across several characters you were introduced to back in Far Cry 5, and a lot of the questions you're left with at the end of Far Cry 5 will be answered in Far Cry New Dawn, which, by the way, takes place 17 years after the events of Far Cry 5. There is a lot to do, including, obviously, the main story, side quests, outposts that you can continue to raid and get ethanol from, and ethanol is very vital to upgrading your camp known as Prosperity, including getting better weapons, among other things. You can also go off to do expeditions in order to get more loot. By the way, there's tons of loot scattered throughout the map in Far Cry New Dawn, along with Easter eggs. Yes, Easter eggs and loot. Two of the things scattered along with wild and crazy wildlife. You have the ability to, like I mentioned, upgrade a lot of things, including your guns, a variety of weapons, which we'll go over in a second. Vehicles can be upgraded, bases, along with a variety of perks. If you want, you can go off hunting and fishing, as well as looting and crafting. And as I mentioned, there's a variety of weapons, and some of them are kind of fun and crazy, like the ability to fire off saws. Those are great, and you get upgraded versions of those as you progress throughout the game, as long as you upgrade the weapons workshop. You got melee weapons, you got takedowns, you got pistols, revolvers, shotguns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, bows and arrows, heavy weapons like rocket launchers, along with machine guns, and more. And there's several ways you can play Far Cry New Dawn. You can either go it alone, just like you could with Far Cry 5, and you can get a quote-unquote friendly NPC that you run across to help you along the way. And there's several friendly NPCs, each with their own abilities, that you can pick from. Or you can play with a friend from start to finish, well, almost start to finish, once you get past the tutorial in co-op mode. And co-op mode is the way to go, because it's a lot of fun to go in and play this game with a friend, especially when you're trying to take down the bases silently. By the way, taking out outposts without setting off the alarms or alerting anybody will give you a reward of even more ethanol. So you definitely get rewarded by continuing to go after tougher and tougher challenges in Far Cry New Dawn. And the animals, as well as the enemy NPCs, do range from like a lower difficulty of 1 to 2, 3, and all the way up to Elite. So you are notified about what you're going up against, enemy NPC, as well as animals, whenever you encounter them. And I highly recommend, for the more difficult animals and NPCs, you have, level 3 or perhaps even Elite ranked weapons to take them down. Alright, so there's the pros. Time for the cons regarding Far Cry New Dawn. It is basically an asset flip, glorified, standalone DLC expansion to Far Cry 5, which only uses part of the Far Cry 5 map. So it's definitely nowhere near the size of Far Cry 5. And regarding the enemy, known as the Highwaymen, definitely not as good, in my opinion, as the Eden's Gate cult from Far Cry 5. The main antagonists, the leaders of the Highwaymen, known as the Twins, have an extremely difficult boss battle. So just warning you about that. You want to make sure you have really good weapons and a really good friendly NPC before you go into that boss battle, or at least have a fellow player that's very good at the game in co-op. But regarding the Twins, without trying to spoil anything, besides the boss battle, just wanted to warn you in advance about that, because I got really salty doing the boss battle. But there's nothing really remotely likable or redeemable when it comes to the twins at all. Later on in the game, tries to give you some sort of reason to sympathize a little with the twins, but in the end, you just don't really care for them. They're not very compelling antagonists, unlike Joseph Seed from Far Cry 5 or Voss from Far Cry 3. There's just nothing about them that you like. Even as an antagonist, usually there's something about him. Like with Joseph Seed, for example, he has this personality that kind of makes you question about whether or not you're on the right side or the wrong side, or maybe, just maybe, he was right all along. But with the twins, they're just nasty from start to finish. And like I said, no real sympathy at all when it comes to the twins, which in my opinion are very one-dimensional. As expected, there are some bugs, issues, and glitches, and I didn't really encounter anything too serious. A few silly things transpired, but nothing game-breaking, but I thought I would mention that. The other issue a lot of people are having with Far Cry New Dawn is, unfortunately, we're seeing this in a lot more story-based games, and Ubisoft seems to be a culprit here, is the fact that they're adding microtransactions to a lot of their story mode single-player games, and Far Cry New Dawn is no exception. Now, what's disturbing is it's even more intrusive in Far Cry New Dawn than the silver bars were in Far Cry 5. So it's very clever how they're doing this. It's like 1 year when they decide to introduce it, you're like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's easy to go earn silver bars and loot and get enough money in order to buy the items. But then with the next installment, they up the ante. They make it even more difficult. They make it to where you can purchase the microtransactions, the currency you can buy in order to use on in-game items on everything. However, as long as you're willing to grind and do the outposts and loot everything, you probably won't need any of the stinking microtransactions. But I do fear that with each future installment of the Far Cry franchise and other games, not just Ubisoft, but EA, as well as elsewhere, you're going to see more encroachment when it comes to microtransactions on single-player games. It's one thing to have it in, say, a free-to-play game or an online game, but it just feels like it's crossing the line whenever it makes it over to the threshold of a single-player game, even one like Far Cry New Dawn that only costed $40. Bear in mind, Far Cry 5 also had microtransactions, but it costed $60 US when it came out nearly a year ago. So there's my pros, there's my cons. Time now for my final verdict regarding Far Cry New Dawn. It is a fun standalone expansion DLC to Far Cry 5, or you could call it Far Cry 5.5, whatever you wish to call Far Cry New Dawn. But the story, characters, and the antagonists are weak. But if you liked playing Far Cry 5, you most likely will enjoy playing Far Cry New Dawn. However, this game is not worth $40. Like I said, it's nothing more than a glorified expansion DLC to Far Cry 5. Now, there were DLCs that came out. They weren't very good for Far Cry 5. The Vietnam one was okay. Mars was very repetitive. The Zombies DLC was horrible. But I guess you could say of the 4 DLCs, Far Cry New Dawn was the best because it actually continued the storyline of Far Cry 5 17 years later. And there's a lot more to do in Far Cry New Dawn than the other Far Cry 5 DLCs. And like I said, it is standalone for $40 US. But like I said, it just isn't worth $40 in my opinion. So if you're not in a rush to play Far Cry New Dawn, if you're just not chomping at the bit to get it today, and you can wait a few months because the sales for Far Cry New Dawn are not doing so well across the board, which means that Ubisoft will most likely put Far Cry New Dawn on sale probably in a few months from now. So a few months from now, you're going to see that price come down from $40, and if you can afford to wait, then I would suggest you wait for a lower price before hopping back in to Hope County, Montana for Far Cry New Dawn. So there you go, my thoughts, my views, my opinions regarding Far Cry New Dawn. If you've played Far Cry New Dawn, I welcome you chiming in with your thoughts, your views, your opinions, your pros, your cons, when it comes to Far Cry New Dawn below in the comments section.